Oh, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 127 of Circle of Fellows. We're delighted to have you with us today for a special and different circle, the first of two this month and next month. This is a look at the chapters of a book that was partly written and edited by Dianne Chase, who is joining us. Hi, Dianne.
Hello. What a privilege to be with you all today.
We are thrilled to have you with us. Dianne is the author of The Seven C's of the New Communication Compass and a former IABC chair. And today we're discussing 4 of the 7 C's with the fellows who wrote those chapters, and Dianne, the book's architect. So before we jump into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you are watching in real time with us, you can join the conversation. Just click that chat button on YouTube, and we will see your comments and be able to share those with the panelists, and you automatically become part of this discussion. I'll make that reminder later as people join midstream. So let's introduce the panelists as I see you in order on the screen. Ginger, hi.
Hey, it's great to be here. Hailing from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where it is actually hailing a little bit today. We're in storm season. So good to be here.
Dynamite. Brad?
Brad Whitworth coming to you from Northern California wine country, Windsor, California to be specific, where we just got the rain and sent it your way, Ginger. So bright, sunny days and a little bit more late showers for this time of year in this part of the world. So glad to be with all of you.
And Jane.
Hi, Jane Mitchell from the UK, and I can't believe I'm sitting with friends from the USA discussing weather. That's what Brits do.
There are. Are you suggesting there are?
We've got blue sky here.
Yeah, are you suggesting there are other topics Brits and Americans could be talking about right now?
Now let me think. I think the 7 C's of the New Communication Compass would be good.
It's a great topic. Let's stick with that. And before we get into those 7 C's, Dianne, what was it that you saw in the communication landscape that made you think that we needed a new compass in the first place?
The swirling seas of change. Seriously, the world of AI is reinventing the way we must communicate to create connection and really achieve the goals that we need to achieve. We bring in AI, we bring in a new mindset from Generation Z and A, and we can't communicate in the ways we used to years ago and expect results that we want to achieve. So how do we think about communication in a new way? What skills, mindsets, again, approaches do we need to employ to ensure success and to ensure that we are making a positive impact, not just in our profession or our organizations, but really in the global marketplace?
And what made a compass the metaphor of choice? What does that do that, say, a framework or a model doesn't?
Well, it kind of fit with when I came up with the titles of the chapters, and they were all C's by design. And I'm like, 7 C's. And I didn't want to get, kind of wonky, cliche 7 C's, but still sailing in the 7 C's. I don't know. I think that number's now changed. But anyway, we'll go with 7 C's. And we need a compass to navigate.
And you landed on the 7: collaboration, connection, compassion, cohesion, community, congruency, and calibration. How did you arrive at those 7 and not 6 or 8?
Well, it actually just happenstance turned into 7 when I was thinking about the key topics that need to be addressed for communication leaders now. it turned out to be 7, and these became top of mind for me.
And you wrote one chapter yourself and then recruited fellows for the others. What was your thinking behind that approach?
Well, the thinking was, I know these incredible powerhouse communication professionals, thought leaders who I met through IABC, and just the depth and wealth of information these fellows have. This brain trust is just ready to be tapped into, and I wanted to tap into the brain trust for the communication professionals that I know and like to call friends and colleagues.
Right. And the result is this right here, this book. We will have a link to the book in the show notes. But let's jump into part 1 of our tour of this book. Brad, let's start with you on connection. And of course, anybody can weigh in on these questions. But Brad, connection, one of those words that can mean almost anything in communication. In your chapter, what does it mean? And what does it specifically not mean?
I think that's a great question to ask these days, because audiences and people putting information out to audiences is increasingly difficult. Are you truly reaching people? Are you really making a connection that goes beyond the superficial? Especially true with internal communications, but it applies externally as well. You know, do you have a following? Do you go beyond the shallow? And one of the beautiful things I think about this book, I keep thinking back, I've been at this for a little while, but before, one of IABC's fellows, the late Dr. Don Ranley, had a 7 C's of his own. But they really dealt with, I'll call it the writing, sort of one of the communication tools. And he looked at writing as needing to be clear, concise, coherent, credible, or actually correct, complete, concrete, courteous, and it all leads to credibility. But it sort of took for granted that people wanted to receive information and they would use it in the right sort of ways. And I think we have come a long way. We live with audiences that are Marshall McLuhan, 15 seconds worth of fame, and attention spans that are the livelihood of a gnat. So we have to make sure that not only are we putting information out there, but we're connected with our audiences, and congruently, it has to be a two-way communication instead of just a one-way dump that we used to be doing. So I love the word connection because I think it captures that sort of elevation of skills. Before it was writing, it was tools. Now we're moving into sort of the reasons behind communication as opposed to just the mere getting the word out.
Other thoughts on connection in general from anyone?
Well, I love that you also included not just the connections that we're responsible for in our jobs, but I have always felt like a big piece of the value that we bring to the organizations that we work with and work in is that at the end of the day, we're information brokers, and we have the ability to bring those connections inside an organization to put different teams together because we're working in and out of all these different groups. And I love that you brought that out in your chapter, Brad.
Thank you. I think the sort of building on that, I think part of what I said, the responsibility for a lot of us now is not just communicating, but it's also creating the environment in which communication can take place. And while perhaps people look to us, if we were lucky to, we got to get it to the communications people to get the word out. Communication had been taking place all along, and we didn't have to get involved. And we sort of fought for that battle to be, one, to be able to be the ones who were the nexus of all of this stuff. And at a certain point, you have to realize, no, maybe the best thing we could do is do ourselves out of a job. Because if every leader in every organization did a good job communicating with his or her teams, there wouldn't be a need for a lot of what it is that we do. So I think our job now is to up the game and look at those connections and build that environment in which connections are taking place naturally and communication is flowing sort of without our intervention or without our help.
So go ahead, Jane.
I think it's also the point that you made about two-way communication. We're not just transmitters, also to the point that Ginger and Dianne made. It isn't a question of producing nice words that deliver a message. It's about understanding as communicators how the communication derives from the stories that we're telling. So it isn't just about the CEO message any longer. And people see through that. You know, the connection builds that trust, which is absolutely fundamental in organizations. And the communicators are those brokers, as you say, Ginger. And it's really important the people who work in this profession understand that role. And it's not just about the message delivery.
100%.
Brad, we live in the most connected era in human history, and yet all of our stakeholders, customers, employees, you name it, report through various studies that they're feeling less connected than ever. What's going on, and what can communicators do about this?
Wow, a great question. I think we have often thought about that in a way that does continue to make some sense. At one point, our role in communications often was to hit a mass audience. It's like, we're going to communicate everything to everybody. And the reality comes back and you realize that not everybody in an organization or in the outside world needs to know everything that's going on everywhere. So what we need to look at are I'll call it sort of the deeper connections. Start looking at primary, secondary, tertiary audiences who all have very, very different information needs. And instead of one size fits all, which never really worked anyway, we really have to start using some of the tools that are available to us today that were never around to be able to start targeting audiences, understanding what people's information needs are. And instead of sort of force fitting the communications to the people, I've been an advocate, and I've not really seen a great model for it yet, but I think it's just around the corner, is information to which people subscribe. Because just because two people are doing the same sort of job, they might have very, very different information needs and or styles. Somebody might be the kind of person who wants that phone to buzz the minute there's something happening because they're, information junkies and want to stay on top of it. There are other people who might be better off and better informed by getting stuff every once a week and give me a summary because I'm pretty comfortable with this. So we have at some point got to move into the, instead of us as communications people deciding what information everyone needs out there, we need to turn it around, turn the whole equation and let people connect to the information that they need to do their jobs. And their information needs and the content may be very, very different for two people who are sitting side by side doing almost identical things. So to me, that connection takes on a meaning of understanding your audience and making sort of, again, that two-way street, which is instead of us deciding what you need and us delivering what you need, it's the what do you need, how can we best provide it, where is it? And in today's world, there is a lot of stuff out there, maybe too much. And I think the other piece that I would sort of throw into this is that we have to have that sort of understanding, connection, cohesion aspect going, because there are so many other choices out there. And people have the honor of being able to use the delete key whenever they want to.
Other thoughts on why people are feeling so disconnected despite being so connected digitally?
I think there's just too much. As an individual, there's just too much. You're getting hit with everything from your social media channels to your organization stuff to family stuff. Everybody has a family text chat thing going on all the time. And it's just too much. And so, like Brad was saying, you have to be able to figure out, how do I get the information that I need and get rid of all the junk? But I've always found it to be a huge challenge to convince leadership that giving employees the option, I mean, that seems to be the rub. Every leader wants their thing pushed out to every single employee and to every customer because it's the most incredibly important thing in the world to them. So therefore it must be to everybody else. And that's where I always find the challenge lies, is in convincing them. It's a tough spot.
Yeah. And I think to the point you were making, Brad, and this disconnection piece, is that if, as a professional communicator working with a CEO, you're not able to show him how to connect on the basis that you understand his audience and you know where they may want to connect, then you're only ever going to be a messenger. And moving you into that arena of strategic advisor, which we talk about in IABC a lot, that is one of the triggers into that discussion. Because, and I'm not saying that that's an easy thing, by the way. I don't necessarily have the key other than British bolshiness. But they won't connect with their audience unless they understand what it is that their audience need to connect with, not necessarily what he or she believes they need to have. And it's actually turning that on its head. You know, it's communication 1.0, isn't it? Know your audience. Number one, know your audience.
Yeah.
Connect.
Dianne, you put connection in the compass and you asked Brad to write it. What did you want readers to walk away understanding about connection specifically? And why Brad on this one?
Oh, well, good question. Why Brad? Because we all, you know, the thing about this book and our discussion, Shel, is the fact that it's like a big Venn diagram. Everything really interconnects and intertwines to create successful communication and communication leadership. Definitely, there's the power in all of this working together for the greater good for our organizations, our people, and our leadership. But so the remit for each chapter was for an outcome. So the outcome for connection was the outcome of building a positive culture for greater engagement, loyalty, productivity, and retention. And so in Brad's career, I know that, and even as an IABC leader, he's been all about connection and building bridges, bringing people in ways that are meaningful to them. And that's really what connection is.
Great. Well, Jane, let's move on to congruency. Why congruency and not alignment or consistency? What does that word capture that other possible synonyms don't?
Oh, maybe we should start with Dianne. Why should we congruency? Because we had that conversation, didn't we, Dianne, about alignment, congruency. But obviously, alignment or any of the others don't start with a C. So congruency.
Exactly.
So yeah, even I got that. That's a really, really good question. And I start the chapter with congruency. I have to confess, I haven't read it since I wrote it and it was published, because there for me lies the route to madness. So congruency it could be about alignment, but where we ended up, I mean, and we could debate it for the next 20 minutes, but I won't, Shel. But congruency for me, and what we agreed together, Dianne and I, was about how you ensure through communication, and obviously there is no certainty here, but the motivation is to make sure that people are pointing in the same direction, but also each of them is congruent with the other's motivation, their engagement with work, the purpose of what it is that they are doing at work, and that their work purpose engages somebody sufficiently to say, I understand what I do in order to deliver that. And if all of those things, it's very much a bit like Diane's Venn diagram that she was discussing earlier. When all of those things are, and I'm trying not to use the word alignment, but it's more than alignment, because it's the connection between the two. So you can see why the 7 C's actually is quite clever, because as you work your way through the discussion about connection and congruency, you come up with the same visual that says when these things overlap and connect, you get the sweet spot.
Anybody have any other thoughts? Yeah, Dianne, what do you think?
Well, and thank you for that, Jane. Your perspective and your really thought leadership on this is wonderful. But congruency also, in my view, is larger than just alignment. We need alignment on several different levels in organizations. But congruency, simply put, to me, is walking your talk and building your reputation, because you are aligned. You're aligned with your values, your purpose, your mission, your vision, what success looks like. But you are really, as a communication leader especially, you're role modeling that. So your actions and your words are congruent. The way you are interacting with your colleagues, your direct reports, your internal, external stakeholders, is all of that congruent? Because what does that do? That builds trust. We want to work for, be involved with, volunteer, lead in organizations that are built on trust. So if you have a communication that is congruent with your values, you're walking your talk, the reputation builds, the culture builds, and the success builds.
Jane, how does storytelling specifically create congruency, the match between what the organization says and what it does, rather than just, say, the emotional connection between leaders and employees, or leaders and customers or other stakeholders?
I think you said it there, Shel. It's about the emotional connection, and storytelling for time immemorial, back to the African plains, was the way of creating community and connection and congruency and understanding. And I'll use a specific example from my work in codes of conduct and values, embedding values and corporate values and principles and so on. Is that it's great to have a code of conduct and a code of ethics. That's fine, and it can be beautifully crafted and nicely written. But if you don't want it to go in, well, these days it's probably all online anyway, but if you don't want that to be archived, or back in the day, shoved in a top drawer in a desk, and obviously desks are far less frequent now, you have to tell stories to help people understand what that means and why it's important. So why should I bother? Why should I bother to listen? For instance, I'm an ethical person. What do you mean I have to read a code of ethics? Of course I'm ethical. And then when you start to uncover the layers of the story of what that might mean, of a value of respect, for instance, I'm sure the 5 of us knowing each other might have similar views about what respect is, what respect means to us as a value. But I can tell you from experience that when you start to unpick values across global organizations, for instance, they mean very different things to different groups of people and different individuals. So unless you're creating stories around those, or allowing people to develop their own stories, then you will forever have multiple individuals and multiple groups having different views, and there will be no congruency. So creating stories around corporate messages and information that on the face of it, well, we just need to let people know, let's just tell them. Yeah, that's fair enough. That's a very basic level, but stories are engaging. And in that engagement, you get people to understand where they sit and why it's important.
I remember doing a focus group for a client back in my consulting days where I was asking them why they were so cynical about their corporate values. And they started telling me stories about things that had happened in the organization that directly conflicted with the values. So the stories are going to get around. It seems to me that the organization needs to create its own in order to provide validity for those values. Dianne, Jane in the chapter made the case that incongruence can be catastrophic. Why did congruency need to be its own C rather than just folded into something like cohesion? Where did you draw the line between those?
Well, and it really does go back to exactly what Jane was talking about in terms of storytelling. So in storytelling, you are looking for congruency. Storytelling is about using a personal story to convey a business message. So if you're talking about a value, just as you mentioned, Shel, that congruency has to be there. If you're trying to keep people engaged with the values of the organization and making sure they're not, imploding your company reputation internally and externally, you have to be congruent in living those values in the way you communicate, in the way you engage with your colleagues, in the way that you just are living, as you mentioned, your code of conduct and code of ethics work, Jane. It's all about how are you being congruent, because now more than ever we can smell that rat. If you are saying one thing and doing another, professing to work this way and have this this trust and belief in your colleagues, but you're micromanaging, that's incongruent.
Brad, Ginger, yeah.
One of the interesting things to me is that all of the C's that we've got revolve around, and maybe this is the Venn diagram, very, very much a cultural aspect to communication as well. We all know it takes a long time to build a culture or to understand it, and certainly to try to change a corporate culture is not an easy thing to do. But I really look at congruency as one of those where the parts that you have of an organization are all marching in the same general direction, have an understanding and respect for each other, and they're working in harmony to be able to accomplish some higher goals. And I think part of our job is to make sure that those dots are being connected all the time, and that there is that alignment. To me, because you said why not alignment? Alignment to me is almost the substitute for agreement. You and I are aligned on that, means we sort of agree. It doesn't necessarily mean we understand each other, we help each other, we have
right.
a goal. And so that's where I see the distinction between the two. And I think it's also a higher calling. It's a little bit more challenging to get to that state. The other piece that I'm reminded of as we've having this discussion was a discussion that many of us had with Dianne and putting the book together. It's like, who's the audience for this? On the one hand, it's communications people, but on the other hand, it's also the bosses in the organization, the leaders who need to enact the kinds of things that we're writing about. It's not just we'll put something out and we got our job done by attacking the 7 C's. It's that the walk and the talk. It's getting the leaders to be able to behave in the ways that we're talking about with all of these C's.
100%, Brad. Exactly right. It's about how are we going to facilitate the change that we want to see in organizations to create new cultures of trust and engagement and success by elevating communication skills from our leaders as well as communication professionals.
Yeah.
Ginger, let's move on to calibration, a word that sends shivers up my spine because calibration is an instrumental part of the performance review process where I work. I'm sure that has an entirely different meaning in this context. Well, let's find out. What's the distinction between calibration and measurement? Communicators have been trying to prove their value with measurement for as long as I have been in this field. What does calibration do that measurement alone doesn't?
Yeah, no, great question. I think and part of it is our perception. I think it's really easy to think in terms of measurement. That's something you do at the end of a campaign. And when you measure something, you're getting a number back. So we achieved X and we're trying to prove, how we did that and what we did. So you run a survey and you find out that customer satisfaction is an 8.2 out of 10. That's a number. Calibration takes it a step further. It makes it makes sure that not only that you have that value, but that it actually means the same thing over time and from different places. A simple analogy would be one of your tools is a thermometer and it's 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a measurement, that's a number. But calibration is making sure that all of our thermometers are aligned so that when we're checking for that number, we agree that that's the number and that my thermometer is not 5 degrees off, that everything's been calibrated and that we can trust in these numbers. Without the calibration, you might be relying on the wrong number. So it's coming to agreement. And then even if you use the visual of if you're going to calibrate an engine, I think it's easier to remember that measurement isn't a one-time thing. And if you're constantly calibrating, you're going in, you're checking it, you're adjusting, you're checking it again, turn that engine on again. And that's what calibration does. It's a constant. It's not a one moment in time and done thing. It's constantly coming back. So measurement produces numbers and calibration produces a shared truth, something that we can all agree on, that this is our reality. So I think that's the biggest distinction.
I was interested in knowing what Brad thought about calibration, having worked for HP for so long that got its start making calibration equipment. Do you see an analogy there?
I think I do. The making sure that, again, sort of everybody's on that same page is so critical in organizations. And we talked about it. I mean, in some ways, it's another way of talking about congruency, but from the very, very important part of, I'll say, the metrics aspect of things. And I maybe influence a little bit because I just finished a 10-week statistics course that had us doing all sorts of regression analysis and box plots and standard deviation calculations. So it was all about measurement. The interesting thing about measurement and calibration is once you understand the importance of looking at the value of what it is that you're doing, you're also capable of asking decent questions and maybe even better questions about the world around you. What does that mean? How does this fit in? Can you measure this? What is the impact of? And things that maybe were not part of a normal communications person's role. So again, I look at this as, as Ginger talked about, we are used to doing metrics and maybe IABC and things like the Gold Quill program have forced us to learn how to measure and not just the output, but also the outcomes. But I think the other piece is we're being asked to sort of prove things at a little bit higher level. And I think that's what calibration is as opposed to pure metrics.
Great. Ginger, can you maybe walk us through a before and after with this concept, a team that maybe was measuring but not calibrating, and then what happened when they, when they flipped, when they pivoted and started looking at a calibration approach?
Yeah, sure. I don't have a specific example to give you, but part of the problem with measurement is if you've got different teams across the country and you're all measuring them, you don't the outcome of something at your location, and you've got different teams conducting that, you don't necessarily know that everything's being carried out the same way. And an 8.2 here might be, you might decide, well, that's really equivalent to a 6 over there because of the way they do things. Whereas if you have calibrated, you know your processes are consistent, which is important. And this chapter is really written from a higher viewpoint than just comms. It's written for the business leader on how they're going to measure within their organization, and encouraging them to get the consistency of when you take those measurements, whether it's monthly, daily, real time, quarterly, which ones are appropriate, where does productivity and profitability, where do those two things intersect? Because that's what you're looking for. Just because maybe you were measuring closing customer service tickets, and you brought that down because that was the number that your team was focused on. But then customer satisfaction went out the window, because even though you were closing tickets faster, problems really weren't getting taken care of, and customers weren't happy because you were rushing them through the process. And so it's stepping back with calibration to make sure that you've got the right metrics, as few metrics as possible, and that you're constantly, when you go in there and make tweaks to the process, that you're constantly rechecking. And there's a million AI tools out there that make measurement and the metrics easier now to consolidate big volumes of data. And so whereas before we might have relied on a customer satisfaction survey once a quarter, twice a year, once a year, because they were big efforts, now as your customers give you feedback through just email exchanges with your customer service team, all of that can be dumped in to look for trends and how they're feeling. Are they happy? Are they sad? So we can get those metrics easier, faster, which allows us to have a better pulse on what's happening, and to make changes and adjust as we need to, and to quickly see if those adjustments made a difference. With traditional forms of measurement, you had to wait until that next customer satisfaction survey came out. And that may be a quarter, half a year away from now. But it's knowing and looking quickly to see, are we headed in the right direction? Are we not? Stepping back if we're not, making those changes and going in. Did I answer that?
I think you did.
Okay.
Dianne, calibration is the 7th C, the one that arguably makes the other 6 self-correcting. Was calibration always going to be part of the compass, or did you realize along the way that without it, the others didn't hang together?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, in clarity, calibration originally was conclusions, but after a very insightful conversation with Ginger, it's clear that we can't come to conclusions and say this is success. It comes back to, as Ginger mentioned, it has to be organic, and it has to be real time, and it has to be looking at trends. And again, the remit for calibration was using wise measurement, measuring what matters and setting out why, and then turning those insights into action. And you are in the process building strategic communication as integral to the organization's success. So while it's really measuring outcomes and not just outputs, as Ginger was mentioning, that's the important part in all of our work, really. It's really solidifying strategic communication as a lever for success in organizations.
And Shel, I'd love to build on what it is that Ginger was talking about in terms of some of the metrics. Working in an organization that takes customer satisfaction very, very seriously. What's interesting, though, is the evolution of the practice of customer satisfaction attention. At one point, they were measuring customer satisfaction sort of on a one-size-fits-all quarterly basis, and they realized that wasn't enough to be able to act upon things. So tying the actions into, and also the what, is your 5 the same as my 5 kind of thing. They want to build a culture where every interaction with a paying customer is a 10 out of 10 experience. And what they are now doing is not only, it went from sort of quarterly to monthly to daily measurements along a number of different axes. Somebody's calling into a call center, they get a little quiz afterwards that said, how was the interaction? If somebody has made a call to the house to deliver a product or service, how was that interaction? After you've engaged with the website, and we probably all run across these, can I ask you a question about, did you find this? There is a measurement. And what was also interesting to me was, besides these 8 things, they know what the biggest dissatisfiers are and all these sorts of fun things. There are all the opportunities for people to add, verbatim comments into this feedback mechanism. AI is helping them. AI is looking at all these comments, and instead of spending 2 or 3 hours looking at how were yesterday's comments, AI is doing it not only quickly, like in 1/20th the time, but it's doing it in real time, so that people are able to watch the trends. And the people who used to be the analysts say, now we have an opportunity to turn it into actions. And so I think that idea of calibration, making sure you're measuring the right sorts of things and being able to take action upon it, are sort of essentials of closing the loop. It's not just we came up with a number, like Ginger said. It's like, what does it mean? And are we consistent with what it means? And are we doing something about it to make a place better?
Yeah.
Jane.
I'm also reminded, and I've gone all hot and cold when Brad is talking about that, because the frequency with which you're now asked for feedback as a customer, it's just relentless. It's relentless. Back to Ginger's earlier point, there's just too much stuff. And I think that if I think about internally, engagement surveys, what a cop-out they are, or have been in the past, until you started to calibrate. So where in the past exec teams were rewarded if there was an increase in the output percentage of levels of engagement. Now, how did that calibrate with the write-in comments, where people would raise specific issues, very much like the feedback that Brad is talking about? Oh, no, we'll ignore those, because actually the number's good and that's fine. I get a big uplift on my bonus this year because the engagement scores have gone up. But they're not calibrated. And to use Ginger's phrase from earlier, which was really great, was, have I got a different truth from you? And inevitably, yes, across a global organization where you've got numbers that balance out for a slight increase in engagement, whatever the number is, the output number, as Dianne says. But actually, what's the outcome in this operational division or that operational division? And is the number where the leaders sit back on their laurels and say, look, it's fine. But they're not calibrating it with anything else. They're not calibrating it with the way that people feel. And the thing so luckily, things have evolved. And where you have those insights, people are using them much better than they used to. And they are providing that the storytelling in a way is, okay, so this is the number. So, if we just take that as a number, we've increased by 2%. That's great. However, if we calibrate that against what you said in your open comments, these are issues that we need to be discussing with you. And that closes those gaps. But if you, like happens to me all the time, as I'm sure all of us, we give that external feedback as an external customer, we get no response. So they've got the response, they've got a number, they say, oh great, well, we were getting 75% feedback, terrific, marvelous. What do they do with it? We have no idea, absolutely no idea. It disappears off into the ether. Even when you ask a specific question in the feedback, comes there back, no response. It's maddening. That's that kind of discongruency, and it's certainly not calibration, but that calibrating the inputs, the outputs, and the outcomes, fundamental.
Yeah, I was at a conference where somebody raised a question to the speaker about survey fatigue, and the speaker said, there is no such thing as survey fatigue, there is only bullshit fatigue.
Right.
And he defined that as asking people to complete a survey and then never sharing what the results were. So,
or doing anything with the results. That's
right.
the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And if that's what happens, you're going to be very reluctant to take more surveys from that source. But if they do come back and say, here are the results and here's what's going to change as a consequence of that, people will take those surveys all day long. Dianne, you wrote the chapter on compassion. Why did you save that one for yourself?
Well, because I think it's an area that is often misunderstood. People have different impressions of what compassion means in organizational culture and communication, and there's a mindset that it's a softening of communication, when in fact it's a strengthening, because it strengthens connection, it strengthens clarity and trust. And it really is a way of communicating that achieves those goals that we've been talking about with the other C's, in terms of cutting through the white noise, creating direction without putting your thumb down on someone, because they feel like they're understood. They feel like you truly do understand what they care about and what their motivators are. We talk about alignment and engagement, but really the way I think of it is, how are we motivating other people as communication professionals and leaders? Leaders help people be the best version of themselves. How are we connecting with them? We talked about, number one, always start with your audience. We have to understand our audience in order to understand how to communicate with them in a way that is understood and feels genuine and feels like they are really part of something greater than themselves. So if we communicate with compassion, which is different than empathy, they do get kind of bucketed together and they do work together, but compassion is action. It's not a feeling. Compassion and empathy to create communication that connects, resonates, is meaningful, is really what compassion is about.
Let me throw this out to everybody. Dianne, you mentioned that compassion can sound like it's a soft, squishy thing to business executives. So how do we make the case to a skeptical executive that compassion matters and is not the enemy of rigor?
I'll take
Because
a stab. Oh, Jane, you go.
Yeah, Jane, you go.
I was just going to jump in, and then Brad, you just take on. We're talking human beings. That's why.
Exactly.
And you know, these people are not numbers. The people that work with them and work for them, in their vernacular, in corporate structures, they're human beings. So far, they're not robots.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I work for a utility, and the CEO has a mantra that she put in place when she arrived. She's been there now about 5 years, and just signed for another 5 years. And this is an organization that had like a CEO every year for a while because it had been through a number of difficult issues. And she came in, and one of the things she said is, this is a company where we are going to be leading with love. And everybody was like, what? What does that have to do? And you can imagine how that went over with some of the workers on the front line in the utility, who tend to be male dominated, but facial hair, ponytails, steel-toed shoes, Carhartt outfits. What is this leading with love? And it also came back to an issue of safety. So we want you, because you're playing with stuff that can kill people, we want you to come home every single day. Your family needs you. Your organization needs you. You are working with people who need to take care of you. Watch out for unsafe conditions. Stop the job if it becomes unsafe. And so this, while it sounded sort of squishy, it actually had some deep roots in, we care about each other, we care about the team, we care about the work that we're doing. And that applies not only to the coworkers, but also we care about the communities that we're serving and the people that we're helping. So Well, again, on the surface, and it required a little bit of time, a little bit of explanation, people have embraced it. And now there are things like the campaign that's dealing with also like customer satisfaction is called Customers at the Heart. And so all of this stuff is dealing with exactly what Dianne had written about: compassion, understanding, empathy, human touch. And that's why we exist. That's what it's all about when you get to the end of it.
Yeah. And we
Brad?
often talk about courageous leadership, and at the center of the word courage is heart, to Brad's point. And courageous leadership is often seen as being that kind of female and male alpha. We're being really courageous here, particularly in today's world. But at the center of that word is heart, and that, you know, that is hard. That delivers hard results in organizations. It's not the soft and squishy that people can use as an excuse. Sorry, Ginger, I cut across you.
No, that was fine. I was just going to follow up and ask Brad, because I do feel like Dianne's chapter does a good job of making the business case for this. If, as a business, what those results have been for the utility company.
The brand trust is actually growing at the fastest rate of all the utilities that we've seen across North America, which is a big plus. So rebuilding trust with customers was an aspect to it, and that is happening. The other piece that came along with that, the executive vice president that I support also came in sort of in I'll call it the new wave of management that came to, and it's a company called Pacific Gas and Electric, if you want to look it up or read a case study about it. She came in and she said, I was aghast. She'd worked for 30 plus years at Florida Power and Light at the number of severe injuries and fatalities that PG&E had had because it did not have a safety culture in place. And she said, it's just heartrending to have to go to a funeral for a coworker at any point, and they need to do something about that. So you've seen sort of on an internal side of things, people taking care of each other. The number of, it was like a fatality a month between a coworker or a contract person, and that's now been something like 900 days, like 3 or 4 years since there was a fatality. So
Great.
There are some real metrics and some real deliverables that are coming from let's take care of each other, let's look out for one another, let's lead with love.
That's awesome. Because a lot of times that's what it's going to take to convince leadership, the business case.
Yeah. Great story about that, and looking at Alcoa, because I know that they had been through the same sort of thing, a number of fatalities, injuries, all that, and the CEO put in place if there is any sort of an accident in one of your facilities, I want to hear about it at the corporate level within 24 hours, and we have to act on it. And they got into a culture of doing that. And there was one person who actually solved the problem locally, but didn't report it up to headquarters. And they came and they fired the guy, which was really that walking the talk, congruency, action in place. Yeah, you fixed it, but you didn't follow the rules, which is let's report it so we can share the best practices and make sure that this doesn't happen again anywhere, not just at your place.
Yeah.
Yeah, that story is told very well in a book called The Power of Habit, by the way.
Indeed.
And it's all about right?
One more question for you, Dianne, and then if we have time, some general questions for everyone. But who communicates well with compassion in your view? And not the obvious heartwarming examples, but ones that might have surprised you.
Well, in my introductory chapter, I wrote about Satya Nadella and how he completely changed the culture of Microsoft from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. And realizing that communication is a power to change a culture, to generate more success, to attract the best and the brightest. And these are really smart, highly left-brain, success-driven people. But he realized that without compassionate communication, communicating in a way that creates trust and humanizes the culture, then Microsoft was never going to succeed. It wasn't going to foster innovation and creativity and new ways of working and moving away from the backstabbing and the lack of collaboration that is needed to be successful in business. So in an organization such as yours, Brad, now people are wanting to come and work in an organization like that. You're attracting the best and the brightest because of the physical safety, but also the psychological safety, the trust, the humanizing of the culture that improves reputation and again attracts the people we want to work with and for us and the clients and the customers we're seeking as well. So I think that's kind of a really good example of how communicating with compassion and caring and understanding that you're in charge of human beings and their livelihood, and understanding that if you care about them, they're going to care about you and your company.
Well, we have about 4.5 minutes left. I think that's time for this one question to throw out to everybody, and that is for the communicator who is watching this, who feels like they're drowning in expectations from the C-suite. Which C would you suggest they start with?
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Wow.
I have other questions if we don't have an answer.
Well, that might depend on the issue that they're facing. And it could be, why are they drowning, I guess. Do they need to do some dot joining, which could be around congruency? Do they need to connect the people who are piling all this stuff on top of them? Do they need to calibrate what's being asked of them? It could be any of those things. But I've got an answer. They need to sit back and be compassionate to themselves so that they can handle what is being asked of them.
Well, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. But I would start with calibration, because if leadership, and not just because that was my chapter, but if there is too much and everything's flying and they're not allowing you to prioritize, then I think it's time to have a sit down with the leadership on what can be accomplished if we do it this way. And if we measure and calibrate, I'm going to show you X results. I've just always found that that's a good way to get leadership into the conversation, because if they're not listening to you now, they're probably not going to unless you can prove to them that you're speaking the same language they are and that you're looking at the numbers, you understand the numbers, and you want to help them get those numbers to be better, to accomplish the business goals.
I'm reminded a little bit of the stages of grief that people go through. And this is maybe like akin to it or not, but they say there is sort of a pattern and a flow of, denial and anger, but at any time, any one of those can show up, and they don't necessarily show up in order. So back to what Jane said, there's not a particular order. I will also add on top of that today's executives are expected to multitask. You can't just change one thing and then wait and change something else and then change something else. It's sort of like when you change one thing in the system, it has impact on the whole thing. And it's almost like changing out parts on a jet when you're midair. Not an easy thing to do, but it can be done if you have the right leaders in the right places and there is congruency and all these other things. So I almost say read the whole bloody thing and help pull the pieces together for your organization, whether you're the communications person or the leader who's reading this book, and make sure the two of them are congruent.
Yay. Really being clear on what success looks like, personally, professionally, and for the organization.
Great. And as I mentioned at the outset, this is the first part of a two-part circle. The second part, episode 128 of Circle of Fellows, We'll feature the rest of the authors of the chapters of this book. We'll have Zora Artis, Cindy Schmieg, and me. And Brad, you'll be here moderating that panel since I'll be speaking as a chapter author. So we will flip roles here. That is scheduled for 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, May 28th, the later time to accommodate the Australian in the group. Looking forward to that. Thank you, everybody, for a great conversation today, and hope to see everybody else next time. Thanks, all.
Yeah, I want
you.
everybody's
Thank you, Shel.
autograph, too.
It's great.
I've got a book that needs
So much.
signatures.
That's right.